Nature of Philippine Courts. Under Section 1, Article 8 of the 1987 Philippine Constitution, the judicial power shall be vested in one Supreme Court and in such other lower courts as may be established by law. Okay, courts exercise judicial power. So what is judicial power? Judicial power includes the duty of the courts of justice to settle actual controversies involving rights which are legally demandable and enforceable, and to determine whether there has been grave abuse of discretion amounting to lack or excess of jurisdiction on the part of any branch or instrumentality of the government. Okay, that's judicial power. What is the meaning of a court? A court is an entity or body vested with a portion of the judicial power. It is an organ of government belonging to the judicial department, the function of which is the interpretation and application of the laws to controversies brought before it. A court is called upon and authorized to administer justice. What is the difference between a court and a judge? A court cannot function without a judge. However, there is an apparent difference between a court and a judge. But by the way, there is also a difference between a judge and a justice in the Philippines. A judge sits in the lower or inferior courts, such as the regional trial courts and the municipal trial courts. A justice sits in collegial court or in a collegial court like the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals. The Constitution uses the term collegiate. However, by definition, collegial means relating to shared or collective action. So that is true of the collegial courts because the decision is actually made after deliberation on the issues and consultation and then voting thereon. On the other hand, a judge decides without consultation or deliberation with anyone because the lower courts are not collegial courts. Okay? However, take note that a long time ago, under Act Number 136, June 11, 1901, an act providing for the organization of courts in the Philippine Islands, one is called a judge of the Supreme Court as well as a judge of the Court of First Instance. In the 1935 Constitution, the title used was Justice for a Justice of the Supreme Court. So this was carried on and it was used accordingly in RA number 296 or the Judiciary Act of 1948. So the designation became Justice of the Supreme Court. So that's actually a brief history lesson, but as it is now, judge is for inferior courts while justice is for collegial bodies. What is the difference between a court and a judge? A court is a tribunal officially assembled under authority of law with a personality separate and distinct from the judge. Okay, a court is an office. In imagination, a court is comparable to a corporation because it's a juridical entity. It's like a juridical person. So the existence of a court is continuous and its proceedings will remain effective despite the death, resignation, or cessation from the service of the judge presiding over it. On the other hand, a judge or the judge is the person or officer who presides over a court. So a judge is a physical person. He is or she is a public officer. The powers of the judge last only as he continues to occupy the office. Right? Remember, the court has continuous existence, whereas the powers of the judge last only as he continues to occupy the office. A judge may resign, become incapacitated, or be disqualified to hold office, but of course, the judgments rendered in accordance with law when the judge was in office remain valid. Take note that under the rules of court, both a judge and a court may be the respondents in a petition for certiorari, prohibition, and mandamus, where there is a determination of whether the actions are without or in excess of its or his jurisdiction, or with grave abuse of discretion amounting to lack or excess of jurisdiction, and there is no appeal or any other plain, speedy, and adequate remedy in the ordinary course of law. Again, a judge and a court may be respondents in a petition for certiorari under Rule 65. But take note that it is different if it is an appeal by certiorari under Rule 45. Under Rule 45, the parties are the appellant and the appellee. So they are the original parties in the lower court. The lower court or the judge are not impleaded in Rule 45, okay? But under Rule 65, there is a public respondent who may be the lower court or the judge or both. Classification of courts. We have courts of original jurisdiction. So courts of original jurisdiction are courts where a case is commenced. They take judicial cognizance of a case instituted for judicial action for the first time under the conditions set by the law. So original jurisdiction is exercised by courts in the first instance. So in the Philippines, what are the courts with original jurisdiction? Do you know? The answer depends on what type of action. Okay? So if we say small claims or summary procedure, the original jurisdiction is with the MTC. Okay? Whereas if it is, say, petition for the issuance of a writ of kalikasan, the original jurisdiction belongs to the Supreme Court or with any stations of the Court of Appeals. How about if we say petition for the annulment of the MTC judgment? Of course, the original jurisdiction belongs to the RTC. So again, original jurisdiction depends on the nature of the action. Next, courts of appellate jurisdiction. Courts of appellate jurisdiction are courts with the power to review on appeal the decisions or orders of a lower court. Now, what courts do not have appellate jurisdiction in the Philippines? These are the MTCs, where cases are basically commenced or initiated there originally. Usually, cases commenced in the MTC are commenced for the first time in these courts. Okay, so usually they don't have appellate jurisdiction. Next question, what are the appellate courts in the Philippines? The Regional Trial Court is an appellate court when it comes to the decisions of the MTCs. The Court of Appeals or the Supreme Courts are appellate courts for appeals from the Regional Trial Courts. Also, the Supreme Court for appeals from the Regional Trial Court or the Court of Appeals. Next, courts of general jurisdiction. Courts of general jurisdiction are courts with competence to decide on their own jurisdiction and to take cognizance of all cases, civil and criminal, except those expressly withheld from them, either by the rules or by law. A court may also be considered general if it has the competence to exercise jurisdiction over all cases not within the jurisdiction of any court, tribunal, person, or body exercising judicial or quasi-judicial functions. So what court has general jurisdiction in the Philippines? Usually it is the Regional Trial Court. Again, under BP 129 or the Judiciary Reorganization Act of 1980, the RTC has jurisdiction over all cases not within the jurisdiction of any court, tribunal, person, or body. So that is the general jurisdiction of the RTC. Next, courts of special or limited jurisdiction. These are courts whose jurisdiction extends only to a particular or specified case or cases, just like the family courts and the special commercial courts. Let's discuss the case of Gonzalez versus GJH Land Incorporated, formerly known as SJ Land Incorporated, GR number 202664, November 20, 2015. So the facts of the case are as follows. So, intra-corporate dispute was filed before the Regional Trial Court of Muntinlupa City, and it was docketed as a civil case and raffled to a branch of the court which is not a special commercial court. So on motion to dismiss on the ground of lack of jurisdiction, the RTC dismissed the case, saying that since it involves an intra-corporate dispute, it is within the original and exclusive jurisdiction of RTCs designated as special commercial courts. The issue in this case is what happens when a commercial case has been properly filed in the official station of the designated special commercial court but is later wrongfully assigned by raffle to a regular branch of that station. So take note, there are certain RTCs that are designated as special commercial court to take cognizance or who has jurisdiction over intracorporate cases. Okay, so in this case, the law involved in this case is RA 8799, which took effect on August 8, 2000, which transferred the jurisdiction over cases enumerated in Section 5 of PD 902-A from the Securities and Exchange Commission to the RTCs, being courts of general jurisdiction. The wording of the law says, transferred to the courts of general jurisdiction or the appropriate regional trial court, provided that the Supreme Court in the exercise of its authority may designate the regional trial court branches that shall exercise jurisdiction over the case. So in this case, in fact, on November 21, 2000, the Supreme Court designated certain RTC branches to try and decide said commercial cases. On January 23, 2001, the SC Administrative Circular number 08-2001 or 2001 directed the transfer of commercial cases to the designated courts or the commercial SEC courts. On June 17, 2003, the court issued AM number 03-03-03-SC, consolidating the commercial SEC courts and the intellectual property courts in one RTC branch in a particular locality. So these are designated as special commercial courts. So the Supreme Court held that here, the petitioners filed a commercial case with the Office of the Clerk of Court in the RTC of Muntinlupa City, which is the official station of the designated special commercial court in accordance with AM number 03-03-03-SC. So the Supreme Court held that from the time of the filing, the RTC acquired jurisdiction over the subject matter or the nature of the action. Unfortunately, the commercial case was wrongfully raffled to a regular branch instead of being assigned to the sole special commercial court in that RTC. Okay? The Supreme Court said that the erroneous raffling to a regular branch is instead of a special commercial court is only a matter of procedure. That is, an incident related to the exercise of jurisdiction, and thus should not negate the jurisdiction which the RTC of Muntinlupa City had already acquired. So, the proper course of action is to refer it to the executive judge for redocketing as a commercial case, and thereafter assigning it to the designated special commercial court. Okay? So if the RTC has multiple SALA commercial court branches, the executive judge, after redocketing the same as a commercial case, should proceed to order its re-raffling among the said special branches. How about if the RTC acquiring jurisdiction has no branch designated as SEC or Special Commercial Court? Then, it should refer the case to the nearest RTC with a designated SEC branch within the judicial region. Okay? So again, in short, so once a case is filed, let's say an intracorporate case is filed with the RTC acquires jurisdiction based on its general jurisdiction. And the proper recourse is to refer it or to assign it to a special commercial court. Okay, so in relation to our topic of the difference between courts of general jurisdiction and courts of limited jurisdiction, the Supreme Court clarified and emphasized that the matter of whether the RTC resolves an issue in the exercise of its general jurisdiction or of its limited jurisdiction as a special court is only a matter of procedure and has nothing to do with the question of jurisdiction. Okay? The special commercial courts are merely intended as a procedural tool to expedite the resolution of commercial cases in line with the court's exercise of jurisdiction. So again, the RTC acquires jurisdiction based on its general jurisdiction. And as to whether or not there is a special court, let's say for example, in this case, a special commercial court that should handle the case or should take cognizance of the case, it is merely a matter of procedure. So the RTC should not dismiss an intracorporate case. It should refer or it should assign the case to a special commercial court, because a special commercial court is actually an RTC only designated as a special commercial court. Okay. This designation as a special commercial court was not made by statute but only by an internal Supreme Court rule under its authority to promulgate rules governing matters of procedure and its constitutional mandate to supervise the administration of all courts and the personnel thereof. Okay? So, a particular RTC branch which designated as a special commercial court still has the general jurisdiction over ordinary civil cases under the imprimatur of statutory law, or BP 129. Under BP 129, the RTC's general jurisdiction was defined. Okay, constitutional court versus statutory court. A constitutional court is created by the Constitution, whereas a statutory court is a court created by law other than by the Constitution. The only constitutional court in the Philippines is the Supreme Court. How about the Sandigan Bayan? Is it a constitutional court? The Sandigan Bayan is only a constitutionally mandated court. All courts in the Philippines except the Supreme Court are statutory courts. Okay? So again, all courts in the Philippines except the Supreme Court are statutory courts, and the Court of Appeals, for example, regional trial courts, municipal trial courts are creations of statutes. As statutory courts, they may be abolished by Congress by amending or repealing the law which created these courts. So, for example, the Justice of the Peace courts are no longer existing. Also, the juvenile and domestic courts, they are no longer existing. These are statutory courts subject to modification by a statute. In contrast, a constitutional court cannot be abolished by Congress. Okay. Courts of law versus courts of equity. A court of law decides a case according to the existing laws or the laws of the land, whereas a court of equity decides according to the precepts of equity or justice and is sometimes called courts of conscience. It adjudicates a controversy according to the common precepts of what is right and just without inquiring into the terms of the statutes. So, the Philippines, is it a court of equity or a court of law? Okay. Under the system of procedure which obtains in the Philippines, both legal and equitable relief is dispensed in the same tribunal. As our courts are both courts of law and equity, they are not powerless to determine a factual matter in accordance with both standards. However, when we say equity, it means fairness. But equity is not to be applied when there is a law applicable. The judge should not decline to render judgment because of insufficiency of the law. But if the law is clear as to if the law is clear, then there is no question. Equity is not applied when there is a law that is applicable.